imagine that you totted up the inequality coefficients of the right-wing societies, and you did the same with the left-wing societies. Is there a difference between the inequality coefficients? And you'd hope, yes, because you'd hope that what would happen as a consequence of activity on the left would be that something would actually occur to ameliorate inequality. He found no evidence for that whatsoever. So the left is sensitive to the catastrophe of inequality, let's say, but they're compassion-oriented doctrines designed to ameliorate that. On the positive side, there's plenty of resentment on the left too, and I don't want to sweep that under the rug. Their compassion-oriented policies do not produce an improvement in the equal distribution of goods. Yeah. So it's a way bigger problem than we think. And putting into place these thoughtless, compassionate doctrines, let's say, putting them in place again is just going to produce exactly the same outcomes that were produced all through the 20th century.
We must learn again to bring the wisdom of the past back to the table of today if we're to find our way out of the malaise that's affecting the West, I think, to a better place. But before we do that, explore that line of thinking, let's go back to freedom. All of the great sages down through the age, I think you make that point in this fascinating book of yours, obliquely at least, and particularly though the founder of Christianity, I think, would say to a person that your personal freedom is the thing you need to get right and sorted first. It's one by one. And I'm thinking of young Australians who I feel so passionately about that as I say this. It's very easy not to be free. Very easy. Addiction, fear, anxiety, depression, all the things that...
Lack of discipline.
Because
then you're a tool of your whims.
Let's go back to a society which set equality as its goal, Soviet Russia, and in the pursuit of that equality killed 60 or 70 million, that's the estimate, of those who disagreed, who had a different view, who lost their freedom.
Of those who even announced their own suffering. Because in the Soviet Union, if you dared to say that things weren't going so well for you, then you were instantly a political, you were a political criminal for announcing your own suffering. Because the utopia had already arrived, you understand.
Yeah.
And so if you were still suffering, well, obviously there was something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So imagine a society like that, where your own suffering becomes criminal.
I mean, well, exactly.
Yeah.
But let's come to Alexander Solzhenitsyn. We know a lot about what happened because of him. He became an incredible global figure when I was a young man. And I read his book, The Gulag Archipelago. Here is this man who describes the horrors of being a political prisoner because he disagrees. He converted. He was originally a supporter of communism. He came to see how evil it was and how oppressive it was. He was imprisoned for having a different view to the state-ordained insistence that everything was terrific. And he writes unbelievably that lying on his prison bunk one day, listening to the guards beat up a fellow prisoner, the screams and the yells, he found freedom when he realised the dividing line between good and evil, in fact, didn't lie between captor and captive. In fact, the jailers were captive too to a system, to a blind ideology, to an inability to think freely.
Most of them were trustees, so they were perpetrating the very system that imprisoned them.
Not between Catholic and Baptist, he wrote, not between woman and man, not between black and white, but the dividing line between evil actually lies somewhere across every human heart. Plainly, you believe it's incredibly important that we understand that. Comes back to what you said. I think when it's framed, we understand it.
Everyone knows that.
Everyone knows it.
If they think, because all they have to do is think about their own transgressions. I mean, if you ask someone to sit for 5 minutes and think, okay, well, what mistakes have you made in your life? It's like, that'll come up pretty quickly. And you can even ask people, well, what terrible, unforgivable mistakes have you made in your life? It's like, yeah, well, we know about those too. It's like, it's no one's so naive, unless they've really wrestled intensely against themselves. There's virtually no one so naive to not be able to answer those questions. So we know that we've done things we shouldn't have done, and we know that we're not living up to our potential. I mean, but...
Are we doing our children a massive disservice by trying to imply that there's nothing wrong with them, no need for guilt, no need for shame, no need to come to grips with evil.
This is so...
Because the problem's the environment.
Well, one of the things that's so funny about what's happened...
The problem is that we've just got to fix society, fix the institutions,
well,
and then all this will disappear.
Psychologists have been, not all psychologists obviously, but the psychological profession is neck deep in this pathology, has been beating the self-esteem drum for 50 years. Oh no, you're okay, you should feel good about yourself. Like, you're fine the way you are. It's like you think, well, that's a calming message for people. It's like, no, it's not. It's not at all. And I watch my audiences, it's like, it's full of people in the audience who think, I'm suffering a lot more than I think is tenable. A whole bunch of it's my fault. My life is not in the order it should be. I know I'm doing 50 things wrong. It's like, what the hell's wrong with me? What's wrong with the people around me? This is really serious. And some, well-meaning person comes up and says, you're okay just the way you are. It's like, no one wants that message. It's like, no, I'm not okay the way I am. I'm not okay at all the way I am. I know that. And so, when I'm speaking when I'm speaking now, I say to people, well, you're nowhere near what you could be. That's the positive message. It's like, yeah, you're a mess, but you don't have to stay that way. If you're a mess, you know it. Obviously, you're suffering away like so much you can barely tolerate it. It's like, that's okay. You could do something about it. And so that's the thing that turns the lights on. It's like, you could do something about it. It's like, oh.